questions on the, if not, we'll move on to the next category, which is property taxes. This comes up to 20% of our revenue. We don't have control over this. This is handled by the state and to the county. We put this in here just as a reminder. There's multiple different propositions and laws that limit how our property tax is done and derived. Right now, we're getting a spike in it primarily because of home sales, which is causing all these legacy properties to be sold, so they reevaluate the property, and now we're getting taxes on the higher property value. But with interest rates going up, we have a tendency to see that slow down a little bit. Any way it goes, once we get a certain ceiling, the values are frozen because of state law at a certain point, and we can't go any higher regardless of what the value is. But on property tax revenue, as you can see, we've got down in red there, the city only gets 12% or 12 cents on the dollar for property taxes. Almost 50% goes to schools. Then you add in another 12 to the community college, and then the remainder goes to the state and other miscellaneous non-major entities or issues. The good thing about the 10% going to the state is, if we go to the next slide, on the property tax in the middle of VLF, basically the vehicle license fees, the state in 2004 reduced it from 2% to 0.65%, which was going to be a major economic hit on all the cities. What they did is they decided to adjust the revenue loss dollar for dollar in property taxes. So the 10 cents that the state gets is going back out to the cities for dollar loss on the VLF charges. So that's good for us.
Very good. So just a reminder, 12 cents of every property tax dollar comes to us. So sales tax still is king, and that is the primary driver. And what Mr. Ware said earlier is we're creating a new base for our property taxes, but we're not going to see a spike in growth probably for the next decade unless people do home sales selling of their homes because of the legacy selling of homes. We've got homes that have been in somebody's hands for 20 to 30 years and are valued at 1977 and 1960 levels and are now going up to today's market value. And so that's where the increase is coming up. We're kind of unusual in the county with that system because of the fact that we had so many property owners hold on to their homes that we've seen that spike. So we're seeing a change in our residents and we're seeing a change in homeowners.
You're seeing a lot of flipping going on.
Well, yes.
I mean, on some streets where there's like 4 or 5 houses that are for sale, so
Yeah, and some of that is due to the corporate and the money being so cheap. And now that interest rates are going higher, money is no longer cheap. So.
it's not a good place to live.
Right. And so basically what we're seeing at this point with property tax is kind of a 10% increase, which is good. It's one of the double-digit increases anytime you have an increase as opposed to a decrease, that's a good thing. But the higher it is, the better. And we were talking about other revenues a little while ago. The cannabis tax is in here. One of the new revenues that we have in 2023 is our electronic billboard. That's going in,
So the electronic billboard should be operational by July 1 of this year, so hopefully in a month or so. That is a long-term lease and revenue of $325,000 per year with a 2% escalator every single year. So we have built this money into the budget because it will be operational, so that's why you'll see those numbers in there. As Mr. Ware said, our cannabis tax is estimated to go up 24%. We're looking at hopefully having a third operational by mid-year, so we'll have better numbers consumer and their buying habits.
Well, the good news is you didn't come to us last year with construction deficit, as long as you don't do it this year. We're doing good.
We're gonna try
No
not to.
pressure.
We
No
can try
No
not
pressure
to.
whatsoever there, but, the one good thing about, the cannabis,
You know, regarding the billboard revenues, the contract is for how many years?
It's a 20-year contract with a 10-year option. And that 10-year option has higher escalators.
They're gonna make money out
Of course.
of it. Yeah. And we
and the good thing with the cannabis tax,
Councilmember LeBaron had a
oh, I'm
question.
sorry, excuse me.
What is the third MMD and where is it?
The third MMD will be, Kim Investments, and it's on Harris Street.
Sorry.
And his plans are in. And being reviewed.
And with the cannabis tax itself, we just got an article in today by one of our investment firms that let us know that there's new legislation coming down to reduce the max amount of markup on cannabis items in the state.
Oh, of course.
However, when you look at it from a different point of view, is that if the prices of cannabis is lower, especially on the recreational side, people are gonna buy up and buy more. So I don't think it's gonna have that much of an impact upon our revenues in itself. I think it might even enhance it a little bit, but
Do we
we're
have
not.
any idea what the limit is going to be? Will we be under that?
So it's the state markup, doesn't touch the local
Doesn't
markup.
touch the local.
Yes.
I would put it past it. That's why I asked.
And then the other thing that you're gonna see too in some of the other revenues is the building permit activity increases basically 70%. And that is really all the ADUs, all the different stuff because of the inexpensive money. But one thing to remember on that is that revenue is offset by expenditures because of our contract services with Esquil and Rick Engineering and those services that we outsource. But I wanted to bring that to your attention so there wasn't any misunderstandings on that. So here we are on revenue per capita. As you can see, Lemon Grove is still the lowest per capita.
Hey, we broke 600.
The numbers here kind of look a little bit off or a little bit odd. El Cajon only having 725 per capita, but understand El Cajon is 4 times larger than Lemon Grove is. So even though they only have 725 per capita, their income is 4 times larger than what we're getting from per capita. So the closest to us would be Imperial Beach. They're about 2,000 more based on 2020 data on population. So they're running about $100 more per capita on income.
A lot of that's work district.
It doesn't really show what
IB?
theirs comes from.
IB's a lot, yeah, but
Oh, yeah.
their budget's a lot in this work district. And I'm really surprised that El Cajon's ahead of, is behind Mesa, because a couple of years ago when I did these figures, they were higher than Mesa.
There's been a few flip-flops over this. I would reckon that in next year's budgets, once they're approved, there's probably gonna be another movement in this phase because of that.
Yeah, one change, well, I'm not sure if it's a change, but La Mesa has higher sales tax than El Cajon, and so they're collecting more. El Cajon did have a higher sales tax back a few years, but they let part of it expire.
What you're seeing actually is the cannabis. So in La Mesa, you're seeing what cannabis does to that particular city. So the jump really is related to cannabis and what they're bringing in for cannabis.
They pretty much have a cannabis store in Newport. There's many cannabis stores that do Starbucks, so.
And Imperial Beach is now higher than El Cajon, because they just instituted a new full cent sales tax.
Oh, that's right.
That started, yes. So they have those two, they have those revenues that differentiate themselves. And I like to show this slide because this $668 is what we have to pay for all of the services that are collected in the general fund. It's fire services, it's law enforcement services, it's public works services, a portion of public works services,
gonna end up on our revenues. Pretty good news as far as I'm concerned from what I'm seeing on my first delve into our budget. So we're gonna move into the general fund expenditures. And here we have it consolidated again to show the picture of where our budget is being spent, and 43% is being spent through the general fund. Next slide.
Of the general fund expenditures, as you can see, this is where we spend most of our money. Public safety is 41%, and that's law and animal control combined. And then fire is 30%, if I can see the numbers correctly. 30%, and that's to support our firefighters and Heartland Fire Administration. And then the rest of it is community development, public works is 12%, and administration is 11%. And administration includes everything that is not in that category. So it's my office, city clerk's office, HR, finance, and the city council.
Go to the next slide, I'll show that breakdown. So as you can see, our projected expenditures are $17,436,000, which is less than what our estimated revenues are, which is a good thing. So your breakdown of where that money is going. And understanding, we talked about the contractual obligations, so your public safety and your fire are fixed amounts. The only difference in those would be service changes. So therefore, the public safety might change in itself based on animal control, whether or not what our revenues come into from them as far as what fees that they collect, so there could be some changes there. So there's some credits back and forth with animal control, but they're not significant enough to really change the full impact of the contractual obligations.
So this is pretty status quo from your budget of 21-22.
So what we've got as kind of a significant change as far as what we're seeing here is budget expenditures from last year to this year are actually $10,000 less. So staff is, even with the 1% increase from the public safety contract and 3% wage increase for the fire personnel, we're still coming $10,000 less in expenditures because of the constraints that staff has put on purchasing and buying things for themselves. We are also going to have an estimated increase of $35,000 because of the election coming up. That number was a guesstimate based on last election, because we still haven't received the true numbers yet. Last one was a 3, this one's a 2, so we kind of did the numbers and figured that out. The one thing that you're seeing in the numbers, the expenditures, when you look at it, it says, well, that looks quite a bit higher than last year. It's because there's $610,000 of one-time capital expenditures that were approved last year that will be carried forward and not used in this fiscal year because they haven't reached that part of the project yet where those monies are expended. So that 610 is carried over and in the figures. So when you subtract that capital carryover over, it'll show you that we are $10,000 less in our expenditures as far as the general fund is concerned outside of capital.
But wouldn't that be related to unfilled staff positions?
The 10,000?
Yeah.
Potentially there's all of that, but you've got almost $400,000 that we've saved there. Not all of that is from vacancies, but a good majority of it would be, yes.
I think that in some ways it represents us not being able to do work that we intended to do.
Correct. And one of the other things that you'll see in future budgets are, as we replace those individuals and we do get them on staff, we're still going to be a little bit lower because when we bring somebody in, it's not necessarily going to be at the same rate that the person was at left. So there will still be some cost savings there as well.
But Councilmember, you're absolutely right. That's why that capital carryover is so big, because we couldn't get a lot of the capital projects. You know, you approved one 2 weeks ago, which was the sidewalk master plan. We've got a few of those that, were intended to be completed or nearly completed before the end of this fiscal year. And we just, due to the severe staffing shortages, we just really didn't have the capacity to do it, at all. So I will take this one on. So there are some staff requests outside of the council priority, setting that we have, and you'll see all of that information at your 7th meeting when we have this discussion. But staff wanted to have some, requests to put in your atmosphere so you can consider this. So right now, we are dangerously low of, having a fire engine not be operational. And in fact, it's been in the shop more this year than it has been, operational. And so you're really gonna have to bite the bullet this year and buy a new fire engine. And then there's two options if you choose to buy a new fire engine, is we can purchase it straight out. The approximate cost is about $650,000. And some of that built in is also some equipment that will go onto the fire engine. The other option is to do a lease agreement where we do an upfront, purchase of $125,000, and then it's, $100,000 over the next 5 years. Those numbers will be dependent on when we put in our purchase order and what our interest rate is, and so there's a lot of variables, but that's the target number we're looking at with the fire engine. Again, when we had the discussion, when the lieutenant gave his report, staff intends to come back to say, let's add a full-time motor officer, not a traffic enforcement officer, but a motor officer, so we can't deviate that motor officer to calls for service or non-traffic calls. So they do what they've intended to do, and this would be a full-time position, not a part-time position, and it'll to be fully funded. Staff needs some SBCA replacements for the fire department, and that's about one-time purchase of $35,000. Again, this discussion came up at goal setting, but staff is proposing that we do a 3% COLA raise for all miscellaneous staff, which can range between $25,000 and $35,000, increasing our base budget. So that increase will increase our base budget going forward in future years. I do want to note, like I did with the CAC, this does not include me. I'm a contract employee, not a miscellaneous staff employee. One suggestion that came up, and one that we wanted to show the council the cost for, is if we increase our miscellaneous benefits, and those benefits are the healthcare benefits, and up to $600 per employee, which we would match what the fire labor contract says, it would bring up our base budget, $274,000. Now, I do want to disclose that benefit increase would also include myself, because my contract says I get the same benefits as all other employees, as well as the city council. The city council gets the same benefits as employees. So
How much is it now, like $450 or?
so each employee gets $750 for their healthcare benefits per month. And we'd be increasing it to $13.50.
Oh, so it's an increase of $600?
Yes.
Increase of 600.
Increase of,
Increase up to 600, because you would have the option to make it any number
So
you
you're
want.
gonna take it from $750 to
yeah, to $13.50, yes. Now council could, and that's just matching what fire currently has. Council can set that number anywhere between that and what we have. So you can increase it another $200 or get it up to $1,000. And then we can bring those numbers back and show you what those numbers make up.
And I can't remember when we increased that last.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Could you please spell the SCBA acronym?
Chief?
Self-contained breathing apparatus. It's the mask portion that they use when they enter the buildings for fires.
Again, Mayor By Joe. Joe's one of the positions is 54% below market median. In fire, we have anywhere between 10 to 23% below market median. And so we need to correct that, for equity purposes for our employees, to show the value of our employees, and so we don't continue to lose employees and become, one of those cities that trains your employee for a couple of years, invests a lot of money, and then they leave. And then we're doing that again, which I can tell you from a management perspective, that really is hard to have continuity. It's really hard to gain loyalty. It's really hard for somebody to get invested into a community when they're an employee that works here. We really need to make sure that we invest in our employees, because we're in the people serving business, and we need to be equitable with our employees with the rest of the marketplace in San Diego County. So staff is working on an equity plan, and we plan to come back with you. That will be the subject of a closed session at your 7th meeting.
You gotta bring us a survey.
Yes, I'll bring you some numbers, yes. But it is the equity plan that we're looking at to do.
Definitely have had some retention issues.
Yes, we've had retention issues on both sides of the house. Even in fire, we've had retention issues. We've lost firefighters to other communities. I'm very concerned about the battalion chief position. That is way below market, and if it's a one-person position, if that person leaves, I don't know if we're gonna attract anybody into that position, to take on the additional responsibilities, because how we value them in the marketplace doesn't bear out what the market values them as. And so we've gotta take that into consideration.
For what it's worth, we're not the only ones. As you know, I sit on the PIROC, or Military Oversight Committee for City of San Diego. It's a discussion that comes up on that committee quite often about retention. And actually, even hiring, being able to hire, there's a lot of positions there that you're not able to hire.
And believe it or not, when I first started in this business, it was really easy to hire firefighters. We get 200-300 applications. We're now getting 10, we're getting 12. We're not getting the pool of candidates that we used to get. So we've got to take a look at some tools to attract that workforce and compete with the private sector workforce, and ensure that when they're giving back to the community is appreciating the work that they're doing.
And when you talk about the retention, I will share a little bit of information that I haven't shared with you yet. I've been on the job for 6 weeks? I've already received 3 phone calls from 3 different municipalities trying to recruit me.
Local?
Local.
Tell Lamesa to stop calling.
That was day before
And
yesterday.
Don't forget about National City.
Yeah, National City too, yeah.
As I informed them, I said, you know, I love my job, I love what I'm doing here, but, you know, I'll keep that in the back of my mind. But thanks for calling. But it's tough everywhere. So we are in a bad boat, but at least we have some company.
Keep that in mind. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when I'm looking at the 3% proposed COLA, that seems low to me, because we haven't been keeping up with COLA in recent times. But it also seems premature when we haven't done a salary study yet, and we don't even know where these people should be. So what are we adding 3% to, in other words? So I'm trying to get a handle on, is the idea that we're gonna do the salary study and figure out where people belong and then add 3% to that?
We're looking at an immediate fix for staff at this point in time to move them the current salary rate up 3%, which would then also be taken into consideration in the numbers that we do the survey for the median ranges.
Okay.
But that survey is gonna take a while, and we would not be able to
Okay.
truly actually implement that plan immediately. I mean, we can't come back to council and say, we need $6.8 million to make our staff there. What we have to do is do a phased plan for you, and find out what your guidance is, and then phase a plan for that.
They're both very important. The salary study is probably more important, because the difference is, for most of these jobs, is greater than 3%.
Yes,
Correct.
you're absolutely correct about that. But until we can get to the longer term plan, sir, we'd like to make sure that we give
in that we're doing the salary survey and we're restructuring everybody, probably that's going to make up for the lack of increases in past years.
Yes.
Okay.
Because in a true salary survey, you have to look at not only how it works horizontally, but you have to look how it works vertically as well. So you need to make sure that there's no compaction issues. So I'll go back to the fire example. We have a compaction issue in fire with our battalion chief class and our captain class. So we have to correct that immediately, so we then can attract a battalion chief into that class of employees, perhaps from our captain class. But you have to you have to get up to market to do that. And so we have to figure out that compaction rate to make sure that we encourage folks to stay around, and then we encourage folks to get more education, and we encourage folks to have a succession plan to move up.
Right.
My only comment to George is, yes, we got a big raise in a long time, but I think that in terms of COLA, you need to do it incrementally
Mm-hmm.
so that you can make sure that whatever raises you give are sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might look at a 3 or 4 year plan or
Yeah, sure.
something along those lines. I mean, right now, we're doing well and we need to take care of our employees because we're the ones that take care of the city. And having to be in a constant training mode does not benefit our constituents at all. So, we have to pay a reasonable wage, but again, it has to be sustainable. So, I think 3% is a good start. And probably, you'll see you should see the same conversation probably annually for a few years until you get it sorted out. It's not gonna be, I don't think anybody has a crystal ball that knows all the magic answers. That's why you kind of move forward, with a plan and something, over a couple of years.
Any other questions? And so these are steps, so really want you to noodle on this and think about this. If you wanna talk about the fire truck, we've got the fire chief here and he can answer any questions you have.
Can I drive it? No. Probably works on when we play with any there toys, so.
What are your thoughts, regarding purchase versus lease?
There's advantages to both. I mean, it just depends on how it plays out with the interest rates and where they're at. Leasing's obviously a little bit less of an impact on the budget. If you had a one-time fund someplace that you could use and allocate for, then obviously you're gonna save some money in the long run on interest. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of being able to just get a purchase order in, to get it in the queue, because these things are going up. Probably by the time July 1 hits, when the budget comes into effect on the fiscal year, there's already gonna be probably a 10% increase on a $600,000 piece of equipment. So the faster we can act, the better off we are. So whichever process is faster for either the lease, the nice thing about Pierce is who we usually buy from, has an in-house lease program that's a very quick process, and so you're not trying to go out and find additional funding or someone else to do the lease for you. So at the end of the day, that's really Joe's job to figure that out. I just want a fire engine.
And then, so I know that, by 2035, the state of California is looking at turning, a key over to electric vehicles. And so, when we look at a fire truck, what's the anticipated life of the truck? And will we be looking at, new technologies such as, perhaps an electric vehicle?
So what we try to get out of a fire truck, normally the standard in the industry is about 20 years. Lemon Grove seems to stretch that to about 25, 26, and gets a lot of good use out of it. If you want to be proactive and get an electric fire engine now that are available, it's about $1.4 million. So if you want to be a trendsetter, be the first city in the county to get an electric fire engine, we can, but it's going to cost quite a bit more money. And that doesn't include the charging station. So the trend is to push everything in California to be electric, and I think they're gonna have some challenges with that, to be honest with you.
Electric or hydrogen is another choice.
You don't wanna drive a bomb around.
A lot of the ag stuff I've seen is.
Yeah, they are.
talking
There's
about hydrogen.
there's a lot of technology out there. Some of it will work and some of it won't for our application, for
Well, I
example.
think there's just a lot of technology we're not completely understanding
Pretty
where they're
simple.
going at this point.
So, Madam Mayor,
yeah.
I did inquire when the governor's budget first came out in January, knowing that this was gonna be a stacked class, to see if there was any grant money out there under, some of the climate action programs that they had. I asked and had long conversations with Assemblymember Weber's office, to see if there would be any way that they could sponsor, an electric fire truck, and they took it under consideration, and then I got a rejection of no.
They want it, but they don't want to pay for it.
Exactly, and we were using a number of about 1.3, and tried to sell it as, you know, wouldn't it be good to have one of those, modern engines, that is climate forward in a community like Lemon Grove, instead of being in a community like Carlton. And that didn't seem to sell, so we're still working on that, and that's gonna be the future. I just don't know where that future's gonna lead us at this point in time. Electric fire trucks, City of Los Angeles has the first electric fire truck in Southern California. Menlo Park has one on order, and they don't look like your traditional fire trucks. They look a little bit more like a, RV, and the color is white and green right now.
Yeah, you can get them in any color you want. You can get a yellow one actually if you really wanted to.
We're not saying
Electric. Yeah, they're even changing their trucks to red now. But, yeah, they're more of a European style, fire engine. As technology increases and the competition is out there, more of the traditional fire engines, like the ones that Lemon Grove currently has, are coming out, with electric models. Coincidentally enough, though, they all still have diesel motors on them, so that they call them range extenders. And what they are is, that's what they charge the batteries with when you're not around, so they're not exactly zero emission, they're not a hybrid.
If we purchased, what kind of a down payment would we have the first year?
On a purchase, we would expend the entire $680,000.
Oh, no car payments on a fire.
No, that would be the lease option, which
That
would
would be
be
the
about
lease option.
$125,000 down.
Gotcha.
That $125,000 would be the first year's lease plus the equipment to outfit the vehicle, and then the additional 5 years of $100,000 each.
So I want to remind council that previous to me getting here, the newest engine we have in the force, we did the lease payment, and it was $89,500, and I think it was for 6 years. And we stopped paying that 2 fiscal years ago.
So for us, really, the issue is the cash flow. I mean, it's nice if you have the cash to buy it, but you gotta be able to, if you don't have money up front, you have to take the next option, which is the cash. Which is why I had a huge Snap-on bill, big Snap-on, where to buy the equipment.
And
I always think of a lease as, you know, you give it back after.
Oh, yeah, no.
It's a car, you have to
It's a
give it
purchase.
back.
Lease the purchase.
Okay.
which fire truck would we be replacing?
We would essentially be able to put the, second oldest fire engine into reserve status. So right now you have an engine that's 8 years old, you have one that's 16 years old that should be in reserve status now, and then you have one that's 25 years old, which should be lawn art someplace. So it should be out of service.
Is there no value to that for?
It's about, we're putting probably 4 times as much in maintenance into it than it's worth. So it's worth about maybe $7,000. And we're spending about $30,000 to keep it on the road. So the oldest one would go away, and the second oldest one would go into reserve. And so the frontline engines, we'd have a brand new engine, and then we'd have about an 8 or 9-year-old engine as the second frontline engine with a good reserve rig to put people in.
What kind of repairs are those that they experience?
It's overall maintenance. We've got to put some, redo some pump packings and redo some valves and redo just automatically take an engine out of service, that, you know, might start out small, but if it gets a little bit bigger than that engine's out of service, then it's in the shop. And the reliability of the engines right now are decreasing considerably. We've already had 2 instances where we've run out of fire engines, and we've had 1 fire engine in service, and we've had 2 people in a pickup truck trying to run medical aids, which is that's a reduction in service. And it's not the best way, but that was a make do. Usually we try to borrow a fire engine from our neighbors, if one is available. That's the first go-to thing. But again, we can't depend on our neighbors to, you know, to lend an engine for a long-term issue.
Well, as a shop owner and mechanic, I believe there's been more than one customer sat down and said, don't put in more money in this, it's not what I do.
Right.
I think it sounds like theirs.
We are there. Councilmember Gassel, you had a question? Did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
no, I was just gonna say that I really think the lease is the most valuable, thing to do, because even though the savings would be significant in the long run, the truth is that we can probably do other things with the money that would benefit the city in the short run, and I don't see how we come up with $650,000. And I also think that, the chief's point about, getting the truck is critical, because we have to move quickly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that coming up with the money for a lease would be much faster than coming up with the money to buy. So that's another variable.
So the one last note I wanna do is, we went through this process with the CAC, and there's actually some additional, that bore out from the council's, goal setting, that the CAC talked about, discussed amongst themselves, did a priority exercise, and at your 7th meeting, they will come with recommendations about what they feel as your, citizens committee to what you should fund. So I'm not gonna take their thunder, but be prepared for that. They do have a recommendation that they will be giving you all, on how to spend some of the money.
One last question on the purchase, $650,000, does that include all the extra stuff, fittings, of radios, is that turnkey, or is that
No,
just?
so that's the outfitting piece. That's the $25,000 like you see in the first year lease.
Right.
The total, depending on when it's purchased, if there's not a cost escalator, it's gonna cost around $25,000 to outfit it with the light bar and with the radios and the headsets and that type of stuff. So that's about what it's going for right now. That would be reusing all the hose and the hand tools and stuff. We wouldn't be purchasing any new, you know.
So that number is really $675,000. Not $650,000.
No, it's, the 25 is
Is
included.
in the,
Included.
okay, that was right.
The original number was 625 plus the 25.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
However, again, those numbers are gonna fluctuate depending on when we put that.
Steel seems to go up monthly, so.
Right.
It's literally, they're talking about, the manufacturers are telling us that if there's not a PO that gets put in, they're looking at probably 7% increases every other month on it, and it's already gone up 15% since we looked at it for the first time.
Plus the supply chain, what's the turnaround time? If we order tomorrow, when do we get it?
So luckily with Pierce, the manufacturer that we currently
Right.
use, what they do is they are the most expensive fire engine out there, and they're also the least expensive fire engine out there, because what they do is they understand that to keep their employees busy is they don't wait for the big custom orders to come in. So they put about 25 engines in a queue, and they build those no matter what. And so you can get one, it's not a demo model, it's a spec'd out engine that meets our minimum specs that you can get put in the queue, and you can literally have an engine in 2 months.
Oh,
If you decide to order one and custom spec it out, you're gonna get one in 2 years. That's the wait time on it
That's
right now.
kind of what
Yeah, so,
How long
and
did it
they're
take us to get
about
the last one? It was
$760,000.
3 or 4 months, the last, when we got the last one, if I remember.
Yeah, times have changed. Times have changed. We just purchased one for Elkhorn, and it was $770,000, and we're not gonna see it for over a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Wow.
So in the meantime, you're taking that money and putting it into an engine that's worth $7,000, right, to keep an engine on the road. So the quicker that we can get one, the more money we'll save and the better off it will be.
If there's no further questions, we'll move on.
So now we're at the general fund reserve policy. So as council knows, we talked about, we didn't because I wasn't here, but my predecessor, I took this from her slides from last year, basically reminding, city council established a contingency reserve of 25% or more of the general fund's adopted operating budget. So that reserve amount changes every year based on what our adopted budget is for expenditures. Can be used by the council and only by the council, for temporary, resources, if we have some sort of economic downturn like COVID, when we have to do things to it, as well as any type of disasters, flood, fire, earthquakes, those types of things, or unforeseen expenditures, capital expenditures, for whatever reason, we didn't see termites come in, and one Monday morning you walk in and half the building's roof is collapsed because of termites, those types of things. Just saying, those are the unexpected capital expenditures we're talking about. So currently, this is projected as of the first of this year, the first of the fiscal year 2023. Our reserve balance will be $4,792,322, and that'll be 27.5%, which is compliant with your policy, general fund reserve policy. Next slide. So the good news on the overview, we are going to have a balanced budget with a positive revenue flow. Our expenses remain constrained, and basically, if you look at per capita again on expenditures, we are still the lowest per capita in the area. So here we go. The interesting part is that when you look at the numbers, they still did the revenue and the expenditures are pretty much, the charts are pretty much in the same order. Now I ordered them the same, so we had comparison to where they were, but the bar graphs and stuff the way they are pretty much the same. El Cajon and Imperial Beach kind of are right close together, whereas Imperial Beach was a little bit higher on revenues. The problem is El Cajon is dipping into the reserve fund at this point.
Thanks,
So, because when I looked at those numbers, I wanted to go back and say, what? And I noticed that El Cajon has actually got a negative budget this year.
Well, Mesa's been dipping in for a few years now.
I think. So,
They're hard to read because they do a two-year budget, so you
I got it.
kinda gotta dig to find the numbers for the Mesa. But the report I heard a couple of years ago, they were projecting that we did with their reserves count off through 2020. But their reserves are big. I mean,
Right.
Big reserves.
So the biggest question I know that's on everybody's mind is, how are we doing this year? Here we go. Based on projections, and I need to preface this in that I do projections a little bit different than what you're used to, so I tried to learn how you're used to them and do them your way, but there's still some of my influences in there, just so you know. But we're looking to have revenues coming in through the end of June at 16.8, with expenditures at 15.7, having a net positive balance going into the general fund's carryover of almost $1.2 million, which will jump our fund balance up to 11.721. That is the total fund balance.
So, Councilmember Gasso, back to your point, some of that is staff salaries, some of it is not doing some of the projects. But this looks like what you'll end up this fiscal year, if everything stays static, where we'll end up this fiscal year, in the black, opposed to being in the red. And a lot of that is, again, a lot of work that was done by this council and previous councils,
So here is the chart that you were looking at, Mayor Pro Tem, we're looking for is how we are looking trend-wise as far as our expenditures and our revenues are concerned over the last 5 years. So the blue line represents our revenues, and the orange line is our expenditures. So as you can see, in reality, our expenditures have pretty much stayed status quo. This past year, we've had a little bit more based on capital projects and moving things forward in our infrastructure. Our revenues have gone up and down. You can see they were starting to go up and stay steady, and then COVID hit and they dropped back down. Then we started to recover and they went way back up. And when you look at the expenditures now, as we discussed, 17.4, there's $610,000 in there that's carried over on capital expenditures. So if you take that out, you would actually see that the line is pretty much flat and they're pretty much equal, going up at the same pace. So I think that what this council has done and what staff has done prior to my arrival to get all that under control and diversify revenues, you've actually created a system, whether you realize or not, that you are kind of keeping on a steady track. And now that we've recovered, we'll be able to see if that bets out the best that we can. So that's what we're looking at. Any further questions on the general fund's revenues or expenditures that we may answer?
I'm just looking ahead and see if we can cover this.
We're gonna go into sanitation district next.
Unfunded liability.
Unfunded accrued liability for developers, we have that number for you.
It's actually relatively low. It's only projected to be about $500,000 next year.
So it's staying pretty consistent. The silver lining in the fact that our unfunded accrued liability is low is one is it goes back history where when the fire department came back from San Miguel, we started from zero, so our fire or our public safety costs aren't as high. But we've also had so much turnover that 3/4 of your new city staff are what they call PEPRA members or new CalPERS members, which now has a lower payout rate for retirement. So pretty soon, if we can continue to do this turnover of staff, we're pretty much gonna have very few classic members. I'm a classic member, and more PEPRA members, or coming under the retirement overhaul that Governor Brown did several years ago and created a new tier system for all CalPERS members. And that includes fire as well. Fire's PEPRA has changed as well. And it also states that the employees pay more into their pension fund than, say, classic members or previous members.
Okay.
Well, we also made changes in our retirement system during the first term I was on the council. Jerry probably remembers this. Yeah, and I think we're getting to a point where most of the public safety employees are since that time.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
I think a big move we made then was to, we were paying both halves, which at that time was what a lot of people were doing.
Right.
Pretty much everybody's gone to a
Right.
shared, I don't forget what that was. Shared payment was on.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was a big bump. Thank you much to the fire guys for accepting that and understanding that there was some public concern that needed to be addressed.
And then we also created the 115 trust, and that 115 trust is money that, one-time monies that you put away into a separate investment account that goes to help pay some of the bigger bills, that will come from CalPERS, which will help, fund our, UAAL, which is our unfunded accrued liability, account that we have with CalPERS.
And, quick question, do you know what the current interest rate is for, the 115 trust?
So the 115 trust, because of the we get quarterly reports, and because of the crash in the stock market, we've seen a little dip. So overall, our performance is at about 5.6 strategy, and there will be blips in the stock market and blips in investment accounting, so you have to make sure that you stay there for the long haul, not the short haul. And so over the term of what the council has determined as a moderate risky strategy, not a high risk strategy, but a moderate risky strategy, we're still looking at gaining 11 to 15% of that fund over the term that we have.
And I do know, with the 115 trust, that at one point in time, we were earning like 12%.
Yes.
So, that rate fluctuates.
Yes.
And, we'll see what happens in the future.
Yes.
Well, in some ways, it functions like another reserve,
Yes.
because you can put money into it during the good times when you have money, and during the hard times, you don't put as much in. So, I think it's good to think of it that way. And when you think about how much money to put in, you might want to think about, is this a better than average year, an average year, or a less than average year? If you think it's a better than average year, then you probably should put more in, is my opinion.
Absolutely. And I know during your priority discussions, there was a suggestion from a council member to figure out how to allocate fund balance. If you went back to earlier slides, we're gonna have a fund balance of about $1.1 million this fiscal year. How do you allocate that fund balance? And one of those strategies could be 10% of whatever fund balance you have goes into the 115 trust. And so those are things or policies that the council can adopt, but those are discussions for a later date. But that is what you can do with those kind of policies.
And on this slide, I do want to clarify for you, this 115 trust number is not what we have invested in 115 trust. What this is a separate in-house, that money is still in our general fund reserves, but prior to my arrival, there was a decision made that we would separate and hold a portion of our reserves, even though it's still available and counts as part of our reserve policy. A portion of that we would segregate, that in the event we needed to make a payment, this is the amount that we've set aside to make that payment for, so that we could invest. And at this point, that because of the way the stock market has gone up, there's been no direction from council, and we have not asked council for that direction, because at this point, it's doing better in our savings account than it would be in our stock market at this point.
And what's the rate of our savings account? Do you know offhand?
It's minuscule. It's like 1% at that point, but at least it's a positive number versus a negative number.
So you're saying that it doesn't make sense to put that reserve that's in-house into the trust?
At this point, it's not, because when these numbers were made, it was during the time of COVID, and we did not foresee having an actual balance. We were looking at having to dip into this. So we decided to kind of segregate it a little bit so that we could, in the future, look at it and say, we've kind of set this aside for future and putting it through there, but it's still part of our general fund reserve. We haven't put it into a bank or moved it into any other account. It's just an in-house kind of tracking for our own personal.
I'm wondering, I mean, we're in much better shape than we've been in the past. And my understanding of the 115 trust is that we can pull money out of the 115 trust to pay the current year's CalPERS payments. So, I mean, that still gives us pretty good flexibility on that money. Nobody can predict the stock market, but I still think it's a better idea to put that into the trust so that it's there to make the higher
again, it's a long-term investment aspect, and it's, the people have a hard saying, oh, we lost money. Well, yes and no. It's, in the investment strategies, you have $1, you invest $1 at this point in time. Your investment is worth $1. A year from now, they're selling off stocks, but you still have the same stock, you didn't sell it, but the stocks that you have are selling at 90 cents. You have a negative market value of 0.10. 2 years from now, that same stock is now at $1.10. So now you have a market value of plus 0.0.
So you're just, what you're saying is you're losing value, you're not losing money.
Correct.
You're not losing the
So,
the
no, wait, you
stock.
still have the stocks.
Correct.
So it just depends upon where the market is.
It's just, it's based on what you purchased it at and what it's currently selling on the market at. So that's what it's called, market gain or loss. In the accounting world, we have to account for that because that's considered the liquid assets that we have on that. So we have to account for that as part of our annual audit. And in order for us to balance the budget to the audit like we're required to do, we have to include that aspect into the budget goals.
Seems to me that when things are down now, that's the good time to buy because you get stocks at a better value and then, you know, since we're in it for the long term as, you know, as a city. More so than individuals are, it seems to me, maybe now's the time to be looking at investing. We're not gonna lose the value, we just, you know, it's just not worth as much right now. But again, in terms of the long term, now I never played stock market, but I watch a fair number of stock market shows and a lot of them will say, yeah, when it's down, that's the time to buy, so.
Buy low, sell high is the philosophy, exactly.
And our portfolios are managed by a professional firm and.
What do they say?
In what sense?
If you said, hey, we got $1 million to invest, is now a good time?
We haven't asked them. We can ask them that question and have them
What's
answer. Okay. We can answer them and have that question for you, if that's something they want to do.
What firm is that?
It just left my brain.
Peter,
No. Councilmember, I'm gonna get back to you, it just fell out of my head. We've had it for about 3 years, the council elected to join it in 2018-2019 fiscal year. PARS, P-A-R-S, holds the 115 trust. And then there's a third-party investment, and I believe it is, an investment house, and I'll give you that exact name.
We have done business with them for 2 to 3 years.
Yes, PARS, yes.
And we had a choice, at the time we had a choice on
It was an RFP.
levels of risk that we could take, and I think we took a moderate.
And we RFP'd it, and we did a request for proposal. We got proposals from several different investment firms, interviewed those firms. We recommended to city council the top 1 or 2, but all of you saw what they were looking at in their investment strategy. You went with PARS, and then PARS came and did a formal presentation. And then the council chose what investment portfolio to do.
So,
Go ahead. I have a question.
I'm sorry.
On the screen, but go ahead, I've been kind of, sorry.
I was just gonna say, before we move on, doing the math here, we have everything that staff has suggested, that comes up to about $700,000. And then we have a net of almost $1.2 million, is that correct?
Mhm.
And then that's like $470,000. Still
Positive.
positive. All right, that's all.
This is a very unique position, that we're in since I've been here is, I know our first budget, we were still in the positive, but every budget thereafter, we were getting constrained and more constrained and more constrained. And the council had adopted deficit budgets, even though at the end of the year, we did not, end up in a deficit situation, so we didn't really have to dip into reserves, with the exception of the COVID year of 2020, when the world fell apart in the first 6 months and people didn't know how to deal with COVID. Other than that, we've always ended in the black. Even in 1 year, I think we ended to the good of $36,000. So This is the first year where we're ending in the black and projecting to be in the black for the next, at least the next, few fiscal years.
So.
Yes, sir.
Did you want a question? Okay, when you're talking reserves up there, the 3,766, and I'm looking at the budget from, 21, 22, and, ending balance, or the beginning fund balance for 21, 22 was 8,176.
Fund balance is different than reserve balance.
Okay, so the problem I'm having, the problem I'm having, and even going back, and I tracked those back, those three, I've got a spreadsheet with all of that on it. I've always had trouble kind of understanding how we define that reserve. We used to have the 06 fund that we actually had.
And that's what that is.
Okay, so I'm having a little bit of trouble. We got an $8 million fund. I mean, I guess it's a matter of semantics, right? We got a beginning fund balance of $8 million, but we're only calling it 3.7 million as a reserve. Where's the rest of that money? It's an unfunded, it's under unfunded, unallocated funds? Is it real money?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is real money, but it's segregated.
I asked that because the school district used to tell us that beginning balance wasn't real money, so, it's a fair question.
It is a very fair question. The fund balance, the real money is for your unrestricted general fund.
Right.
Your reserve balance is a restricted fund. So it's a separate amount of money.
So we have a restricted fund, a restricted reserve, and we have an unrestricted reserve. That's okay.
Correct.
So do we still track? Okay, thank you. So do we still track, am I asking questions ahead?
No, this, I was looking for that slide, because we showed you that the fund balance is actually 11 million.
Okay.
We'll end this year approximately, we're projected to end this year at 11.
Well, that's why I was not quite understanding the restricted. Now, do we still track? There's been years where we didn't track the restricted the restricted reserves in Fund 6, and then there's years that we did. Are we going back out to tracking that in Fund 6?
Well, upon my arrival, Fund 6 is still active.
It's been there, but it hasn't been active for probably 3 or 4 years, so.
Right. Basically what Fund 6 does is if our expenditures get to a point that it exceeds we drop below the 25%,
Right.
then we are required to basically do a journal entry and move money from unrestricted to restricted
In order to protect that 25%.
in order to make sure that we maintain the 25%.
But that only gets triggered in the event that the unrestricted becomes.
The restricted becomes less than 25% of your operating budget.
Okay, that makes sense.
How many times has that happened in the last 5 years?
To my knowledge, it hasn't.
It has not.
No, our unrestricted reserves have been over $6 million since 1920. So I think even if you go back another year, you're still over $5 million.
And the good thing is when you have that money in there, your operating budget is basically your expenditures. So your 25% of your operating expenditures is where you're looking at. So this year, our expenditures did go up. So our percentage of reserves dropped, but it did not drop below the 25%. So we're not required to make a movement of funding into that.
But the last couple of years, our combined reserves have been over 40%.
Yes.
So, which is a good thing. So I guess that begs the question is that at some point, at what point do we look at doing one-time expenditures out of that, or do we?
And that is a policy of the council, so you can have that, which is why we're showing it to you, you can have that policy. So if you do want to fund a one-time expense, because this is one-time money, doesn't grow, one-time expense, so you want to fund your fire engine out of fund balance, we can do that.
Well, would that, considering that the amount of money we've got in there, it's $650,000, wouldn't it make sense to go ahead and spend it out of there?
That would be a council, if council would wanted to do that.
Yeah.
when
We
get-
certainly
You know,
do that.
Because
That
there's, I
makes-
mean, we're not, we have, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, it makes a whole lot more sense after what Gary's been saying than it did before to me, because I can see how we actually could come up with the money quickly. And it's not exactly one time, but it's like one in every 20 years.
But
Pretty
that
darn
is,
close
but it
to-
is a one-time expenditure, George, I mean.
Oh, that's right,
It's
because-
not like committing, it's not like doing, you know, salary adjustments and those kinds of things, it is a one-time expenditure.
That's true,
And,
that's true.
and
It
then we
doesn't
still got
pay
25
basic
years
growth.
to build that back up.
That's true, and if we could do it as quickly as we could put together a lease agreement, it sounds like a very viable option.
I know the fire chief likes it.
I was gonna look back here and see if I have any smiles I saw back here, you know.
And just to remind the council, when staff comes to you and saying we're tapping the reserve fund, we're tapping the fund balance, not the segregated or restricted reserves for emergency work that needs to get done. So it's, cause it's a one-time expense. I would never recommend to the city council to bleed that down or to use it for ongoing expenses. That would be financially irresponsible. But for one-time expenses, for example, purchasing a piece of equipment for public safety, but not funding the motor officer from that.
No, you.
Yes.
That's
We
deficit spending.
agree to pay ourselves back
So yes,
at
you,
some
yes,
rate?
you can do that. I have been involved where there is, we could borrow from fund balance, so there's a paper borrowing, and then there's a payment schedule like you do any loan, and then you, with interest, and you pay it back, or you pay it back full to yourself. And we can do that internally. Redevelopment agencies used to do that a lot. Redevelopment agencies, in fact, we're getting paid back on our loan from our ROPS, from redevelopment agency. The general fund made the agency many years ago, a loan, a startup loan, and we're now getting paid back that loan from the state in increments of about $400,000 a year.
And they weren't gonna give us that.
We got it back, thank you.
George and I
And we appreciate that.
Exactly.
talked Dr. Weber,
The older Dr.
the older Dr. Weber, making sure we got that.
Any more questions on revenues or expenditures for the general funds? If not, then we can move on to sanitation.
Oh, boy, I got enough of that this one.
So this one is actually gonna be very easy and preview. So this is one of the severe staffing issues that is a silver lining, I should say. We will be coming to council, recommending 0 increase for the sewer rates next year. One, because our sewer study, had reached some complications, and so Joe and I need to spend more time with the consultants to do it. So the council will see it most likely in the fall of this year and set rates for, FY 23-24, or at least approve it under the 218, yes. So staff is recommending that we keep the sanitation budget static and no sewer rate increase this year. And Joe will go through those numbers to show that we can exist in our enterprise fund with no increase.
So again, we'll start out with some of the basics, reminding sanitation district, they are what's called an enterprise fund, meaning they operate as a business. There is no general fund money that is transferred into this fund. They are required to be self-sustaining, meaning that they collect revenues for the goods or services that they sell, and all of their expenditures need to be covered by the revenues that they receive. This is in a full accrual counting method, which means that they recognize revenues and expenditures at the time that they occur, not when they become measurable. Meaning that when they bill, they recognize those revenues, whether they've received them or not, they recognize those revenues. When they get the check in, they recognize or when they actually purchase something or do something to the PO, whatever the case may be, that's when they recognize the expenditures. So it's done at the time it occurs, or at the time that it's recognized or that the event takes place, not when they had physical monies in. So, that confuse everybody on that? No. Okay. So as, city manager explained, currently the sanitation district's fiscal health is good. Their net position, they go by net position, not fund balance, it's kind of synonymous. Their net position remains stable. Their operating reserves remain stable, and their capital reserves remain above the 22 budgeted year. The pure water reserve remains stable as well. So those are all good words for that. As far as their operating revenues, they are being covered by the cost of service, and we are recommending no rate change for the next fiscal year. And the sewer study will come back, and we will bring that to council in future, depending on what those recommendations are, and we'll present those to you with the full study from the engineers.
Don't wait too long.
No,
We won't wait too long on that.
But we got a little bit of a breathing room in terms of pure water and the expenses because COVID kind of slowed down, all the contracts and so on, so. Right now, all the pure water contracts have been awarded, so they're moving ahead, but we will begin to see the impacts of that within the next year or two.
May I ask a question?
Mayor, we've got a question from the audience.
So, I wasn't sure if we were gonna complete the entire presentation and then allow, questions from the audience, or would it be along the way?
That is up to you. You can decide what you'd like to do. If they go into long questions, we do have, long presentations, so we're not here until 9:00. But that is your choice.
I'd like to complete the presentation and then allow the audience to ask questions afterwards. I'll notate that, John Elwood would like to ask a question, so I'll call him first.
so here is the sanitation district operating Fund 15 in their revenues. Basically, you can see in this one, we've kind of compared, because we're not asking for a rate change, we wanted you to see where we were at and what we were doing. So we're remaining stable as we were in last year. While some of the projected revenues might be down a little bit again, it's really not a factor when you see the expenditures on the next slide. So where we're at on expenditures by categories, looking at the salaries, you can see we do have some savings in salaries, pretty much down, we're only at basically 5.96 million in projected expenditures, when we have over 7 million projected in revenues. So we are doing well there, and while our revenues are only expected to be 7.033 million, and expenditures are going to be at 7.2 or 7.3. We're still way under on expenditures this year, so the balance moving forward is not, the $300,000 is not going to be an issue at this point when it comes to sewer rates.
And Councilmember Gastrell, yes, this is really directly related to the salary. So we lost our longtime sanitation superintendent or supervisor. We have made that promotion, but that was half year, and he came in as a lower salary increase. And then we've had trouble filling some sanitation positions, and we're hoping to get those done this year. So we hope to be back fully staffed with sanitation by the end of this fiscal year, so be fully functional in the next coming fiscal year.
You guys reached out to Grossmont, they have I think they have
Yes.
a water and a sanitation class of program.
Oh, we reached out to everybody. I have to tell you, in the sanitation world, that marketplace is much more robust, and sanitation workers actually get a lot more money because of their smaller districts, they're self-contained, so.
San Diego's making a pretty big, substantial increase in their in their program, so they're looking for people.
So that is a job class, we're looking at equity increases, which doesn't affect the general fund, it affects this fund.
And this one basically just is kind of a visual representation of the expenditures that are expected, through the sanitation department with the contracted services, salaries and benefits. You can see, we do rely heavily upon our contracted services, to make sure that, our system stays operational.
That's San Diego, correct? That's contract services.
Yes,
There's.
contract services and, some of our engineering contract services.
Oh, that's true.
The engineering aspects of this. So the next we look at is the capital fund. The expenditures looking out, for the next fiscal year seem to be high, but again, because of staffing restrictions, different things that we've had, the majority of our projects are behind schedule. So what we have to do is realize the lack of expenditure in the current fiscal year and roll that over into next fiscal year. Primarily because, since this budget, once adopted by mayor and council, becomes our authority to spend, if we don't budget it, we can't perform the services. Without coming back to you and saying, oh, we forgot this, oh, we forgot this. So we just assume budget for it, and make sure that we have the capacity to do it, since we already have the revenues in the fund for it. And next year, you'll see any of the projects that we don't get to this year will roll forward again. We don't lose the money from this, it's just roll forward as far as timelines is concerned.
And yes, I've had conversations with our new engineer, to make sure that these get designed and constructed, and we've got several, contractors working on that. We've had particular trouble with one, who will not be used again, engineering firm. So we can do the design and construction so we can stay on top of our sewer system and make sure that we don't have any spills or any, issues with our sewer system.
Will, will we see an increase in capital expenses? I mean, we've been slow for a couple of years.
This year?
Yeah, we see.
No, we won't.
What I was gonna say is with the exit of with Mike, I mean, is it, Mr. James, is that gonna slow things down?
It will, our new city engineer has taken up the mantle, so he's getting up to speed. But yes, there's a reason why we did move, we sort of put a pin in our study, and
Great study.
we're asking to just do a sort of status quo carryover budget, is because of the loss of Mr. James and all of his intimate knowledge. And so we wanna make sure that we get up to speed, and, I hope to hire a new public works director that will replace him by the end of this fiscal year. So, I'm hoping to have interviews in June.
It's gonna be hard to replace that.
Yes, agreed, yes or no?
The new city engineer is
Ed Walton.
So as you can see, the sanitation district, we're basically staying status quo. There's no significant changes up or down. We're just gonna stay stable, and drive through, the next fiscal year. And once the engineer's on board, the public works director's on board, we'll come back to you with the rate study, to see if we need to make any changes for the next fiscal year. Any other questions that the council may have on the sanitation district that we can answer for you?
I'm hoping homeowners are happy that the fact that their sewer rate will increase this year, where everything else is increasing.
Just so you know,
I have to pay it twice.
Oh, no.
so you know, other districts are far
Yes.
more expensive than we are. They're all getting caught up where we
You
stay on
stay
top of it.
We operate it as a business, and we make sure that our expenses and, our costs were well tracked, and we didn't try and play politics with a business model.
I think the county is in their third or fourth year at 14% increase. Yeah.
So the last ones we're gonna take a look at is all the other funds. So this also makes up your fund balance, so if there's any funds in the other funds or restricted funds, makes up your fund balance as well. So other funds, I'm gonna turn it over to Joe.
So our other other funds. It's basically primarily what we call our special revenue funds. These are restricted. The revenues that we get in are earmarked for specific items, and we cannot, by law, use them for anything else. Even if council passed a resolution or an ordinance, we could not use them for anything else. These funds include things like the highway users fund, the gas tax, the CARES Act money. We have the community block grants. We have Transnet, the Wildflower Assessment District, the RTCIP funding. Those types of things are all part of the other funds. Right now, everything is remaining status quo, which is a good thing. There's nothing significantly going up, there's nothing significantly going down. And the really good thing that we are happy to see is that any of the unfinished projects that we have currently on the rolls with any of these funds all roll over to next year. We do not lose any funding. So you'll see, kind of like we did with the RTCIP funding, where we had to roll some of those projects over into next fiscal year. Same thing with these types of funding. Is we'll continue to roll them forward as we need to until we can get caught up. Councilmember Gutierrez.
The PEG fund is the special revenue fund, correct?
Correct.
How much money is in that fund?
Let's see.
I bet this part is-
That would be Fund 30. So it looks right around $325,000.
How much is it?
Around 325,000.
Can I tag on to that question?
Yes, sir.
We, in our goal setting, we talked about doing upgrades to the room here and looking into, the hardware expenditures for streaming and so on. Those PEG monies would be available for the funding that, if that's the direction we go.
Correct, it's a restricted fund and we can buy all the capital, so all of the equipment and the construction related to placing that equipment. Now, the issue could be is, and we had this conversation with the CAC, if we, have to rewire some of the wiring in the ceiling here, and we find out that our 1972 built building has asbestos, we're gonna have to remediate that asbestos. So, part of the exercise we had with the CAC is we talked about a contingent fund in case we needed to do that. In case some of the walls came down, in case some of the wiring, because that won't be covered under this special capital fund, we'd have to augment that funding. Yes, we'd have to augment that.
Unfunded, unrestricted.
With, that's the decision the council can make, if they wanna move forward with that. But yes,
How much is each from that fund on an annual basis?
Let's see.
Because I understand you said there's about 325,000.
It looks like it's projected at this point
we actually, we'll give you the better numbers, and you'll have the updated numbers in your sheets coming in, because, as council requested, we are working on, upgrading and stabilizing our audio system, and so we're using the PEG lens to do that. We've gotta build that in, I think that overall contract is $6,000 or $7,000. But we'll give you the updated numbers, it'll be in your staff report.
Could you give me the numbers that are on that paper?
So this is last year's budget, and we don't have it programmed in last year's budget. So there's no expenditures in last year's budget.
So for last year's budget, you can't tell me how much was spent out of that approximately 325,000 last year?
It looks like
It could be a ballpark.
we projected expenditures to be $9,000.
Okay, so on an annual basis, about $9,000 is used on that 325 that can only be used for PEG stuff.
I can't say on an annual basis because I haven't done a trend on it. I can say that we projected last year for $9,000, but I cannot give you a trend on what we had spent on an annual basis because I haven't done that.
Can you?
No, I don't have that number. I'd have to look at the numbers, I don't have it off the top.
So that's, out of that PEG fund, that 30 fund would be the money, the gets paid to Cox, correct?
Correct.
So I'm looking at the budget from 2021-22, and it does say expenses in there is $36,000. Is that the money that was then paid to Cox? Do we know?
We'd have to check that. Honestly, we
Okay.
didn't look at that, quite frankly. And we'll look at that and we'll
Well, I
address it.
mean-
We'll address it in the 7th meeting. So
Right,
you guys know
I
fully.
mean, this is the time
Yes.
when we ask those questions,
Correct.
we're not always gonna get all the answers we want, back,
Is it on the seventh?
so,
Correct.
On the seventh?
isn't it $2,500 a month?
We'll let you know those numbers.
Yeah, that'd be
We'll
about,
do that.
that'd be about right, $30,000, $2,500 a month.
So we'll let you know that. And then we'll know that new expenses is for the upgrades, to the sound system that we're looking at. They're just waiting on getting the equipment to spin building.
How many years have you been in Metro?
I've been here since 2016. Are there any other questions?
So again, the other funds basically at this point are just going status quo, nothing significant up or down.
Actually, another quick question. Gas tax funds are a special revenue fund, correct?
Yes.
And then what year was it that the auditor said that the city was misusing gas tax funds?
I don't believe he characterized as misusing gas tax funds. I think the auditor, if I recall correctly, dinged the city for not having a allocation study, a cost allocation study, and correctly allocating overhead costs for that particular fund. And
What year
during,
was that?
huh?
What year was that?
No, I think it was, I think that was the 17-18 audit, because staff went to council prior to the audit, understanding that we were trying to better do cost allocation for sanitation, and prior to the audit coming out, we had asked the council to do a cost allocation study for overhead costs. And so that was happening almost simultaneously, and I think that was done in 18. So, but that was what the audit was for, is really the cost allocation.
And we did the cost,
We did the cost allocation,
as they requested.
yes, and completed that.
I'd also like to mention that if anyone wants to look at the audits, they're actually posted on the city website. And you can always go there and read each of the audits, per year. So they are posted, they're, there for public record, and, everything's in black and white. So, I encourage folks who are interested in taking a look at the audits to just go to the city website.
So I'm glad that we're having this discussion, because the next slide on this is, Mr. Ware has suggested making some changes to the budget book, and how information is presented. And so, I think these changes are very good changes, and I'll let Mr. Ware walk you through them, because it's gonna take a little while to wrap your mind around it. It took me some time to embrace the changes, but I think these are very, very good changes.
We've
And I
had
think
to
that-
embrace change in our budget book before, so.
We're embracing another machination of change, and I can tell you that the CAC liked this change. We vetted this change with them as well.
It took them a little bit to understand it, and we walked them through it, and so, without further ado, this is what your current budget book looks like. So I'm using the city council's portion as an example. So from basically the current fiscal year and prior, the budget book was fund-based, meaning all of the sheets and all of the documents that you saw were based on individual funds. So all you saw was the general fund portion of the city council. The appropriated costs that go to other areas, the gas tax, the sanitation, those types of things, are not documented. You have to actually get pins documented.
And I've done it.
And you've done it, so you
I've
understand
sat
that.
down and written taken each fund and written down each one and done the math, and it's a pain in the neck.
It is. So moving forward, what we want to do is move the budget book to what we call a cost-based presentation. It basically identifies all the appropriated costs. It's more appropriate representation of the expenditures, what it truly costs you to run a department. There's a better transparency to it. Once you learn it and understand it, it's easier to understand. And one of the biggest factors is that it puts us closer to the GFOA, or the Government Finance Officers Association standard for budget reporting, and GFOA is the standard nationwide for budget reporting. So, without further ado, this is what our new budget will look like. Our new budget book. And
And of course, I forgot my glasses.
It's not just you.
It's not- it's not the-
You don't see these when you get the actual sheet, but he'll walk you through it.
unfortunately, no, I don't
Can
want
you
to
send
share.
this?
You'll get it on the set. You'll get it in your
Can you
staff
send
report.
us this in a PDF to emails?
You mean the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint from.
Oh, yeah, of course,
I
of
would
course.
appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we put them up on the website anyways, but yes.
So I'll kind of walk you through it so that you understand where we're at. And the confusing part is going to come because since the previous budget books have already been printed, I cannot change that information. So I have to just carry that forward until it falls off the book. So you look at the top with your expenditures, or your expenditure type. So we have the salaries, operating, conducted, and total expenditures. So your actuals. So this portion here is what you normally are used to seeing. Where the change comes in is just in this column here, the last column for 23. So you'll see where now salaries and benefits are 104,000, 105,000 versus last year they were budgeted at 71.6. And you're going to say, I didn't get a raise. My benefits didn't go up. No, because this is what the general fund paid for in that particular year. You only budgeted and you only showed what portion of the general fund was there. Now we're going to show what it truly costs us to have a mayor and council. It costs us $164,000 a year to fund the mayor and council. The expenditures and everything stay the same. So you'll come down to the bottom of salaries, commodities, so your numbers remain the same. What we've done though is we've added our budgeting by funding source, meaning that the general fund is $127,108 is what comes from the general fund. So if you go back to what was budgeted last year at 187 and look down, there was 65 that you had in contracted services that you don't have this year. So that puts you at 122. So you're actually only going up $5,000 this year in the general fund. So then it goes down and it shows, based on the 2019 cost allocation study percentages, what is allocated out to all the other funds.
That's good.
Okay, so what you see is that because you guys sit on boards or represent as boards of different portions of the city's functions, you now have on the highway users tax percentage comes up to 4,500. The general lighting and the benefit lighting each is 11. Your sanitation district board costs are 29,000, and your the household hazardous waste of the integrated waste reduction fund is 1,100. So your total expenses are 164,326, 164,326.
Important for the council to know that we don't get paid anymore for being the most.
No.
It's just that it's being allocated.
It's, right, your portion, and it's the same thing for city manager and myself. Our budget, you'll see when you get the preview, is gonna be in the same format, and you'll see that expanded amount when it comes to the total cost of the department.
Right.
Because now, it's the constituents as well as the council can see, this is what it truly costs us to run the city council, or for the city council to operate.
And
This
it's
is who's
always
paying for
in
it.
the budget, it's just you
Just have to
really
figure out
have
where to
to
look
sit
for it.
down and look at each
Yes.
fund and figure
Right.
it out.
It's in there, it's allocated out, it's charged out, it shows up into all the audit reports. The problem is that, like you said, you have to get a pen and paper and know
Where to go look.
where the funds are at, and know what your portion of allocation is in order to figure that out.
Yeah.
No more spreadsheet funds.
Did you raise your hand, Councilman Barron? Oh, I'm sorry. So the other things that we've added to this as well, because some of the GFOA standards require it, is we've added a department function. Basically, what does the department do? What services do they provide, or what is their function of the city? So for instance, for the city council, we have to establish public policy and develop programs as mandated by the state of California, represent community interests, and work with city management to effectively meet the community's current and long-term needs. That's what the council does. That's the purpose of the council. The other aspect that we have to put in there is significant changes. Is there any significant changes that took place this year or for next year in this department? The budget for the mayor and council has remained relatively flat for the past couple of years. Programs and initiatives approved by the mayor and council usually have an impact on the designated department's budget rather than having a direct impact on the mayor and council budget. Fancy way of saying no changes. But having gone through the GFOA budget award process in the past and getting recognized for having an actual budget that meets their standards, they like long terms versus no significant changes.
And the other changes that we have on the page where you have to go look at the actual organizational chart, we've actually listed the budget, the actual funded, budgeted positions on that particular sheet as well. So you don't have to look around to figure out how many people are funded in, say, this particular budgetary.
Because part of your time is in our budget.
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not?
No, 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 no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no,
No.
no.
Nothing is allocated into the department budget. It's all allocated out of the department budget.
Oh, okay.
So what it is basically is you'll see the general fund departments are the only ones that allocate funds or allocate costs out to other areas. Because they are a governmental fund, and then a portion of my time is dealing with sanitation's budget, their payroll, those types of things. So that's why, since they're an enterprise fund, they're required to pay for those services. So based on the cost allocation study, those costs are allocated automatically. Instead of trying to figure out or have people keep track on the timesheet of how many hours they do this, how many hours they do that, the cost allocation study did it all for us.
Right.
Right.
And we got the formula from, we got an ongoing formula from
Yes,
them
yes.
when we did that, in order for us to continue to.
Yes, that was part of the contract, yes.
And then the last change that you see on that, the personnel aspect of it, is just a graphic representation of the expenses. Your salaries and benefits, the operating expenditures, and any contracted services, so that at a glance you can kind of see where you're at for each year.
Thank you.
My pleasure. The one thing that you'll note this year that we do is we've annotated each of the areas that have changed with a note so that the public knows as well as everybody else does that the presentation of the expenditures were modified in this fiscal year to show total expenditures by department rather than by fund, as was shown in the previous years. So therefore, hopefully this is a little bit easier for everybody to understand. The question on how much is sanitation paying, how much is this, or those types of things, this hopefully will answer that for everybody. So each and every department will be presented in this fashion. As we go into the other funds, you'll see similar, but sometimes it'll be a little bit more constricted because in capital, there's nothing going to the general fund, nothing to the other stuff, so there'll be difference. But this is basically what the department presentation is going to be.
So the challenge this year will be to explain when somebody looks like last year the salaries were 100,000 and now they're 150,000. How many increases did you? It truly is not. What we're trying to show is the fully funded positions,
We're
and that,
accounting for a difference.
yes. So we are making sure that, again, going back to showing everything on one page, so people don't have to hunt and pack throughout the budget, and making it as easy to read as possible.
Right. And my biggest concern or issue when I first started looking at the budget book and I went to the city manager and I said, your budget book is wrong. It costs more than $100,000 to run a council, I know better. And so we went through an educational process, before it finally clicked into my head that, oh, you guys are doing a fund-based budget. Okay, I get it.
Yeah,
And
I
neither
think-
one is
and
wrong.
that happened for all of us, you know, when we first got on the council and started delving into this, you know, that's not right, you know, and then, it would get explained and then we, you know, but yeah, it's a laborious process, so I appreciate, you know, every year you kind of have to go through and add things up and make sure they do add up. And
Right.
this will make it a lot easier for us and for the public.
Correct, I believe so, and this is one of the tasks that city manager gave me when she hired me, was basically to move us from our current budget system into a budget system where we become part of GFOA City of Excellence, in our budget reporting. And this is the first step for us to do that.
Good, maybe we'll get more grants.
Any questions on the new layout, comments or concerns, or?
No, it's great.
All right, and moving on. Where we go from here? So, as you saw us earlier, writing all the different comments, different stuff that you talked about, we will go back, and I say we, I mean me. We will go back and take a look at the notes and the feedback that you provided to us, and we will look at incorporating that into the draft budget for fiscal year 22-23 to present to you on June 7th.
And you said the CAC will be presenting on June 7th?
Correct.
And
They will
so-
present to you before I present to you.
Okay, and then at that time, we could incorporate, just, you know, I'd like to hear from them first.
Yes.
And
Correct.
then we could incorporate our ideas based on suggestions from the public and
Yes.
from, our advisors.
And we're gonna try and build the story, so we'll do your goals and objectives first, and you can take a look at that,
Okay.
and then we'll go into the budget discussion, so you
Okay.
have that fresh in your mind.
And my plan is to take what we currently have and present it to you, so that you have the CNC's recommendations, you have your reminder of your goals and objectives, and you will have what I consider to be the draft-based budget. Meaning, this budget is what it costs to run the city. What you want to add to it is on top of it. And then we will take that information from you, I will go back, I will redo the budget, get everything back into line and in order with all of your recommended changes, making sure that we're still fiscally stable, and bring that back to you on the 21st for adoption.
And with that, staff, is done with their presentation, and if you wanna take public comment.
I would like to address something before we move on. There was a question on the auditor's report on the gas tax. That was indeed in 2016. I
Was
keep all of those reports, it was 2016.
Thank you.
And here's exactly what they said. They said, based on our testing of costs charged to the city's gas tax fund, it appears the city is charging both direct salaries and indirect overhead costs to the fund. Various percentages are used to allocate the salaries of certain positions, including finance and human resources personnel, to the fund. However, the city staff was not able to provide us the documentation in support of these allocation methods. This goes to what we took care of that next year. We addressed that, the auditor's concern the next year, which we had already started working on. Because I know Jennifer and I both were asking that same question about that cost allocation. For example, we were not able to find a cost allocation study or plan, we took care of that, which would provide evidence that these allocations are reasonable. So the whole idea of an audit is to find holes in your system. The problem only becomes if this were to keep showing up on the audit year after year after year, and I assure you, I've read all of them since this one. And this did not show up again on any subsequent audits, or these are actually called internal controls. This auditor did a little bit different. usually there at the end of the audit, this auditor sent a separate letter, and this is where it's.
And it wasn't that the allocations were improper or shouldn't have occurred. The issue was that the city didn't have the backup, the proper backup for those allocations.
And we fixed it.
We continue to do the allocations, it's just now we have a cost study to back those allocations up.
And I'd like to make a request, can, staff email that page with that language that Jerry just read, so that each and every one of us can take a look at it ourselves?
I will add it, I will send that off to you, along with the, PowerPoint.
Thank you.
I think there's a bit of confusion, because there's actually some of my colleagues who have publicly stated that they have detected and stopped fraud coming out of our gas tax funds. So I appreciate you reading that, Jerry, and I just do wanna remind my colleagues that, that statements that have come from some of you who are up here around this table are that you have stopped and detected fraud that comes out of our gas tax funds. So when the public is looking at our roads and wondering where their tax dollars are going, because they seem to not think it's going into our roads, and then we have elected officials from the dais and other places publicly saying that they have stopped and detected fraud coming from the gas tax funds, people's mistrust of this government comes exactly from what they see on the streets, doubled by elected officials then making statements such as those. So thanks for reading that, that was helpful.
I want to say, I haven't accused anyone of fraud, and I'm not sure who you think was accusing anyone of fraud.
I'm gonna go ahead and say something. I feel compelled to do so. So in 2016, and while this is an official government meeting, there's no campaigning that is going on. When that audit was performed, I made a statement that said that the audit revealed, and I said it revealed exactly what is on that page. So there was no accusation of fraud being implemented by staff, and what I said was that it was fixed. So there were accounts set up that had money, some accounts didn't. Staff was being paid out of gas tax and sewer fees. That was fixed. And if you look at any document, any webpage, or any article, it will say just that. So please, I did not say that. That is a misstatement. You're misquoting me. Please don't do that.
Ma'am,
I don't run around and claim fraud, waste, and abuse. I simply state the facts based on the documents.
Ma'am, I
The
didn't
facts
quote you,
are the
but if
facts.
you take the
So
offense to
that is all
I'm
I'm
sorry,
going
but
to
that's
say.
your problem.
And
I didn't quote you, actually.
I'm going to move forward to the public comment portion of the meeting, because we're not here for that. We're here to really take a look at the budget, provide comments to staff, and look towards a brighter future for the city.
I understand,
That
but
is
I did
why
not
we are here.
I
So
did not quote you, ma'am,
I'm
so
gonna
you're
go
misspeaking.
ahead.
And
You're
I feel
misspeaking.
impelled to correct
So
you.
I am going to go ahead and move forward here. We have
Thank
the
you.
public comment portion of the meeting, and John Elwood, he did submit a request to speak, I'm assuming, about the sanitation district, the FY 22-23. And so you can approach the podium and you can speak.
Since I'm the only one that has a pump station in the city, I would like to know how long, or are the funds still there for the rehab of the pump station? How long will it take to get it completed? My neighbors have asked about, the markings in the street, and I keep telling them, it's not up to me, I can just ask, but they would like to know, what's going on with the pump station. I know it's quote unquote in design, that's the rebuttal that I get whenever I ask questions about it. And we've had a flow test on it, and, it's still, to me, it's still up in the air. And, I just like to know,
It's still in, it's a carryover, John. We're looking to see what was projected. I can get back to you, I have a number, as to exact dates and what they're looking at. But it's still in the budget and the money's still there, and that's part of the carryover for the sanitation.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'd like to check to see if anyone else has any questions. And I do not see any questions at this time. And, Doreen provided me with enough information, enough comments.
Absolutely. If anything occurs in the next week or so, as we finalize this, please send those off to myself or Mr. Ware, and we can make sure that we include those in the discussion points for the 7th meeting.
Thank you so very much. And our next city council meeting will be held on June 7th at 6 p.m. right here at